Alrighty, so here we're going to start project 6, and we are going to replicate this orb in at least 3 different brushes, and you're going to make sure that it's in a color. This is a picture that's on Blackboard, and you want to go ahead and find it, download the JPEG on your computer somewhere, and open it in Corel Painter. You're going to go to New, and in this menu, you're going to go ahead and name this Project 6. Your last name, DR270 if you'd like, whatever your naming structure is. This is usually default set to pixels, so make sure you change it to inches and make this a normal size piece of paper, so 8.5 inches by 11 inches. And we're going to go ahead and do 300 DPI. If you've already created it in something else, that's fine. Usually with the DPI, you want it to be 300 for press print quality, 72 DPI is the max that you can see on a computer screen, and 150 to 200 is probably what your standard home printer is going to print on good-ish settings, right? So if you're going to hit OK, now we're going to get to the nitty-gritty of our piece. We want to go ahead and hit up here, we're going to hit the minimize button so that we get 2 projects right next to each other. This is important because we need to be able to drag and drop to get this item into here. Now there's a couple ways we can do that. We can select all with Control A, or select with our selection tool. And I can just hit Control C and move over to this and hit Control V. That'll get my item here. I can also come over here and instead of Control C, Control V, I have this whole selected item. I'm going to go ahead and grab my layer adjuster, click on it, and drag it over into this one and drop it. And there we go. Now, we definitely did a different resolution in class because these are too small, but I'll fix that in just a second. So on this one right here, I'm going to go ahead and close it. I don't need to save the changes because I don't need that anymore. This is my project now. I'm all good. I want to remind you guys that you're going to hit Control S and you're going to save. Now you want to save this as a RIF file. A lot of these are standard image files. We talked about this in class and the different functionalities of saving these, but to get the most functionality out of your piece, you're going to want to save it as a RIF file, and you're going to want to go ahead and save it in the normal place that you save your images. Our next step is we want to size and place these really well. So I'm going to hit Control R to make my rulers come up, and I'm going to click to add my rulers. I can go ahead and just click on the ruler to add a ruler, like that. And I'm going to click in from the edge at 1/2 inch all the way around. And I'm going to do this vertically as well, so 1/2 inch here and 1/2 inch here. And then for each, I need to make 3, so for each one I'm going to make it 3 inches high. So that makes 1, 2, 3 inches and a 1/2 inch gap between, and then 1, 2, 3 inches and a 1/2 inch gap between. Now I want to remind you that these are just guidelines. They're not really there. We can see that reflected in our navigator up here. Our lines don't appear because they're not real. I already have 2 layers, so I'm going to go ahead and right click over here and say duplicate layer, and then I have a 3rd. Grab my layer adjustment tool. I'm going to drag that down so you can see that I have 3 circles on 3 different layers. Now I actually don't need these necessarily on 3 different layers, and I'm going to go ahead and actually delete 2 of them so that I can resize one and then duplicate that. So I could go to this right here because that is the transform tool, right? Or I could go to edit, free transform. Either way, I'm going to be able to adjust this layer as a transformation. I'm going to grab the upper right hand corner and hold shift so that I can pull and push it to the size I'd like. Now this is very similar to the scale tool in SketchUp. You want to hold shift so that you scale in proportion, and you can also skew it if you'd like to. We do not want to do that. So I'm going to hit escape to start it over. I'm going to hold shift and make it bigger. Down there, hold shift and make it bigger, and that's about how big I'm going to make it. Now I'm going to do that duplicate layer thing again, and I'm going to do it twice so that I have 3 of them, but I've done them, but they're all the same size, right? You want to make sure that you switch layers before you try and move your items. Now you can arrange them in any way you want. I'm going to go ahead and arrange them in a little stagger pattern just to be adorable, because I like to be adorable. And again, to move them, you need to click on the layer and move them around. Okay? So we want to make sure they stay inside their little boundary box, and that's all well and good. Now when we actually start painting, I'm going to grab another layer. I'm going to talk a little bit about layer arranging now and layer naming. If you if you double click on the name, you can rename it. So I'm going to rename that Sphere 1, Sphere 2, and Sphere 3. And I'm going to name this layer Paint Oil, because I'm going to paint on this layer with oil. Now, another thing I can do is we can make groups. If you click on this layer right down here, this is the layer involved with, or the tool involved with organizing your layers. If I click the drop button, it's going to drop whatever layer I'm currently selecting all the way down to the canvas layer. And if you look at that icon, you can see it change. The sphere is still there, but it's on the canvas layer, instead of being on its own independent layer that we can control anywhere we like. Another thing you can do is collapse layers. So if I select more than one layer and I click collapse layers, that's going to put all three of those layers on the same layer. When you press drop, the only place it'll go is the canvas, but if you collapse layers, they'll collapse together and in on one another. Again, I'm going to hit Control Z and undo that, and instead I'm just going to group these layers. So when I select multiple layers, I can hit group layers, and now they're going to become a group. And I'm going to call that Sphere Pictures, just because I feel like it. So now all of those are in the same place, which also means that if I click this little I button, I'm going to be able to see and unsee all of those spheres all at the same time. What I'm actually, I can also click over here to get this little lock button. And that means that now that I've set where those are, I can't change them. I can change their opacity. I can't transform them. If I go over here and try and transform them with this tool, I can't transform them anymore. I can't do anything to them because I've locked them, because I don't want to mess them up. So I kind of want them to be like that. I'm going to put them to about 64% so that I can see them, but I'm not too invested in, I can see them, but they're not blocking my view of anything. Now I chose this picture so that you could see the descriptions of cast shadow, the reflected light, this lighter spot down here, the core of the shadow, or the darkest part of the shadow on the sphere, the transition from light to medium values and then to the darkest shadow values, and the highlight. You can also see there's a little background, a little table line, and cast shadow. So I want you to do all of those. I'm going to start with oil paint, and I am going to use something that will show up. I'm going to reset my brush, see if that does it. I'm on this layer. Oh, I've got something on up here which might be worth discussing, because it's also one of the primary reasons that occurs why your paintee can't paint. So my brush won't paint. I don't know why. These two items are where that comes in. This one means your opacity, which is what this bar is right here. But these two lines, this one right here is a little lock button in the transparency, and if you hover over it, it says preserve transparency. Do it again. Preserve transparency. And what that means is that if I turn that off, I can paint any transparent pixel that I want to painty pixels. But once I'm done, if I click block transparency, I can only paint on top of pixels that are already a color, which means I can paint in here, but I can't paint over here. So I can turn all of this red, but only where it's already blue. Now that seems kind of complicated, but let's be honest about something. It's useful on occasion. So if I deselect that, and I come over here and I go to the oil paint, and I come over here and I go to the selection tool, and I decide to select a circle. I grabbed the circle selection tool and I'm holding shift so that it stays an actual circle. And I'm also going to grab this right here, which allows me to move the selection itself. And that's pretty darn close to my circle. So I'm going to go with that for right now. See if I can make it a little smaller. There we go. Okay, so now I've finessed my selection to be really close to the exact thing I want it to be, and then I messed it up a little bit. Story of my life. There we go. I'm gonna call that good. So I have this selection, and when I have something selected, if I go to my brush tool, I can only paint what's inside that circle. Okay? So while I'm selected, if I grab my bucket tool and dump, whoops. Okay, so I grabbed my bucket and I clicked in there and it filled exactly just the circle, right? It did exactly what I wanted it to do, except I told it to fill with an image instead of fill with the current color. I can also fill with a gradient if I want. I can fill with many things, but I really want to fill with my current color. So I'm just gonna change that to current color, click in here, and there we have a fill of the current color. Then deselect. Now, I'd also like to be able to see my picture over that circle I just did, so I'm going to grab that layer and drag it underneath the other layer. So now you can see that they're mixing a little bit, which is why it already looks like it's shadowed, but if I turn off the original, you can see it's still just a red circle. But I have just the perfect circle in the perfect place. So if I go back to my brush tool, and I go over here to my layers panel and click on Preserve Transparency, now I can't paint that little swirly thing that I made is still over there. Do you see that? But theoretically, I can't paint anywhere outside someplace that already has pixels. Now I'm going to turn Preserve Transparency off. I'm going to turn it there. I'm going to turn it off and grab my eraser. And grab my eraser, and I'm going to erase in here. See if that helps the problem. And grab my brush and my B key, and yeah, that got rid of that. So I'm going to color that real quick. And then turn Preserve Transparency off. Turn my eraser back on. Erase that. Put Preserve Transparency. You do not need to do that, obviously. So you have this circle filled with color, and I am going to make my sphere texture even less transparent. I just want to be able to see, oops, you can't tell I'm moving the bottom one, not the top one. Okay, there we go. So I got the right layer, moving the right opacity bar. Okay. Okay, I realized the layers left. Thank you. So I'm going to paint on the oil layer again. And now I'm going to grab a darker color, a darker red color, and I'm going to grab my brush tool, and I'm just going to lay in the dark color. Now, since I have Preserve Transparency on, I don't have to be careful about going over the edge. Yay me, right? Yay! So I'm going to lay in where the darker color is, and I'm going to grab this white right here. I'm going to lay in where the lighter color is. And now I'm going to grab a blender and blend them. Now what I can also do is push down my resaturation and bring up my bleed and blend with the brush I already have in my hand. So this, one of the things I call this is my wiggle. And when you're blending, one of the things you want to be careful about is that you don't bring in from the outside. Because if you bring in from the outside, what you're going to get is white. Because that is what your background color is. So I'm going to start blending, and I'm going to bring this, and I'm actually make this a little bigger so I get a better, smoother transition. And you can see that I'm starting to get a nice smooth transition from one color to another. Now I'm actually going to turn off my sphere picture so you can really see this vibrant red ball I got going on here. Now I also want to say that like I lost a little bit of color right here because I was blending out, accidentally blended in, which means I need to blend back out. So with preserved transparency left on, I'm going to grab the dropper and I'm going to click the inside so I get this really bright red back on my brush. I'm going to go back in and I'm going to push my resaturation back up a little bit so that I can color that red and color that red again. Okay, I'm going to grab my dropper and grab that dark color again and lay that back down. Now I'm also going to grab my opacity. I'm going to turn that down a little bit. And now I'm going to do another pass right here. So I'm already going to start that phase of the color fading to darker. I'm going to make sure to wrap that up around the top just a little bit so that I get that little cherry apple shine getting down to a little cue ball. None of that really made sense, but just pretend it did. So I'm getting darker and darker. Now I'm going to pick an even darker color to go down here. Darker color to round that out. So I'm blocking my color first. Now I'm going to grab my dropper with the D key and grab that lighter color again, grab my brush, and I'm just going to gently brush that back in down here. That's the reflected light that you saw in, I'm going to turn this back on, that's the reflected light right down here. And you want that to be the lighter color again. So I'm going to grab this and return it to 0. And I am going to go ahead, so that it's a blender, and I'm going to go ahead and bump that up all the way up. Oop. Okay. I'm on the sphere layer and it won't let me do anything on the sphere layer. So it's reminding me that I can't alter those original pictures. So you need to make sure you're painting on the right layer. Now, even though I'm blending with 100%, this is looking a little fuzzy to me. I don't know about you. It's looking a little bristly. I'm going to go with it, but if I wanted that to go away, I would just choose a smaller brush, or I would bring the feature down just a little bit. And that's going to soften that out quite a bit. Make sure this right here needs to be a little lighter right there. Not quite that light, but it needs to be a little lighter. So I want to make sure that I start blending in the right place. And I'm going to keep your fingers near the Control-Z key, because if you do this, you want to be able to undo that. So I'm gently moving and blending along these rings to make sure that they're getting the color that they're supposed to be. Again, I'm going to undo real quick to make sure that I don't get the white in there where it's not supposed to be. It's a little difficult when I'm trying to blend this red edge down here. But remember, you could also bring in 1 or 2% of the color that's close to it in order to get a better blend. So making this a nice blendy blend color. If you're ever in doubt about the shape of your piece, go ahead and turn your sphere layer back on so that you can see it. I'm going to grab a little bit of white and bump just a little bit more resaturation in there so that I can see just a little bit more of it. And then I'm going to put just a little bit in there, and then put my resaturation back down and blend that. I'm just going to make my brush a little smaller so that when it's in this concentrated area, it's not quite as difficult to work with. I'm going to back that up to right before I put that white in. To right here, I'm going to back that up to right before I put the white in. I'm going to bring it back up, and with the smaller brush, I'm going to put that white in, because I think that those gobs of white were just a little bit too big. So that's the advantage of this over, obviously unadvantage of this over real mediums, is that if I make a mistake, especially if it was like a step or two ago and I realize, oh, that blob of paint was a little too big, I really shouldn't have done that, or I never have to wait for paint to dry because you know what, it's digital, so technically it's already dry. If I don't want to interact with it, I don't have to. So I think that that's a pretty good picture. So I'm going to open this back up and I'm going to create another layer, and I'm going to put it below the oil paint layer, and I'm going to call this one Oil Shadow. And while I'm here, I'm going to create one more. Click this button down here to create one more, and I'm going to call it Oil Background. Okay, and now on the oil shadow, I'm going to grab the selection tool, and once again, I'm going to make a selection that's going to look very similar to that cast shadow. I'm going to move it around. Oops, that moves the layer, that moves the selection. Make sure you're grabbing the right tool or it just won't work. Okay, that's really close, but again, I can use these little handles to move my selection around. So now I'm on the oil shadow layer. I'm going to grab a very light or a very dark black or almost black version of that, and I'm going to grab the brush and either brush all the way across it. I need to make sure my resaturation's up, of course. So either I can fill this in with a brush, make sure your preserved transparency is off, otherwise it still won't paint on anything. So I can make sure that that my brush is working, or I can hit the paint bucket, make sure it's on current color, and fill that cast shadow. Now I want to make sure the oil shadow layer is behind the paint layer, otherwise this won't work. Oil background, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to grab the rectangular selection tool, excuse me, I'm going to select that rectangle, and now I'm going to do it with the brush because it's got a bit of a fade to it. So I'm going to go ahead and lay in quite a bit of stuff, but I'm going to do it, whoop, nope, I'm going to click Control S, because that was my computer thinking real hard about things that I don't want it thinking real hard about, and making the mistake of closing my thing. Okay, so I'm going to hit deselect, and I'm going to turn off my sphere layer in the background, and this is what I've got. I've got kind of a fadey thing that I did, and I've got a cast shadow, and I've got my item. So just to look, I'm gonna go ahead and group these three layers together, just like I did before, selecting them and hitting group layers, and I'm gonna call this Oil Sphere. So those are all three layers that are going into my oil sphere in that group. So with one button, I can look at my oil sphere, not look at my oil sphere. So I'm going to go ahead and turn that off and look just at my original picture. You can see in just this original picture, the cast shadow, if I go ahead and bump that up in opacity, you can see that my cast shadow is not, it's darker than all of this, but it isn't completely solid. It's darker in here than it is right here and right here. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to my oil sphere. And I'm going to grab my eraser, and now you'll notice with the eraser, you have a reset tool. You have the same kind of free rein or line. You have an edge thickness, and you have an opacity and a size. And I'm going to bring the opacity of this eraser really far down. And I'm going to bring it out here. I'm going to turn the sphere pictures off. Even though my sphere picture's off, I'm on sphere 2. That's why it's telling me the layer's locked. So again, I need to make sure that I'm over in the oil pictures and that I'm on the right layer in the oil shadow. I'm going to make my eraser a little bigger, and I'm just going to lightly erase the cast shadow on this side, and that's too much. I'm going to do that one original one. I'm going to make it even bigger, and again, I'm going to lightly erase over here in a shape of a circle. And I am also going to go ahead and make the edge of this cast shadow a little less severe. This is a little fuzzy, partially because the picture is a little fuzzy, but I know that it needs to be a little less severe. So there are a couple ways I could do that. I could blend it, but I'm gonna go ahead and use those photo brushes that we were talking about, and I'm actually gonna blur it. And I'm gonna blur that edge just a little bit. And all you need to do is gently run your brush, and by gently, you don't really have to do this. You're just gonna carefully run that brush around the edge of that shadow, and that looks much more shadowy. Also, it's a little thick right now. I mean, let's just be honest, it's a little thick. It doesn't look so shadowy. So I'm also gonna take my layer adjustment tool and I'm gonna knock it back a little in opacity. That's better. That's better. That looks much more shadowy. So like 85, 90%, that looks much more shadowy. So now I can tackle the background. Which a background, you know, a background can be a lot more fun, right? So I'm gonna put preserve transparency back on so that I keep that shape that I made. And I'm gonna pick a couple more colors. I'm gonna throw some orange in that background. And I'm gonna go ahead and go back to my oils, and I'm gonna pick a different oil brush. I'm gonna pick something that's a little bit more interesting. I'm gonna pick, no, I don't want that. I don't want that. I'm gonna pick soft lens. I'm gonna pick this. And the idea that I'm trying to get across to you right now, ooh, I do not have preserve transparency on, so I need to turn it on. There we go, that's better. What I'd like to get across to you guys is that you can choose whatever you want and do whatever you want for the colors of this, especially on the background. If you want to do a pretty like photo background, go for it. If you want to do that was terrible. That's better. That brush is better. Okay. If you want to do a pretty well blended photo background, that's fine. If you want to do whatever you want to do, I really don't care. I want you to put some background in there that's about this shape, that goes from dark or more saturate around the orb, around the sphere right here, to lighter everywhere else or different everywhere else. I need you to have contrast right next to the sphere so that we can see the sphere no matter what color it is. And I need you to have a cast shadow, and I need you to have a background. Anywhere in between that, I don't care. I need you to blend, I need you to choose 3 different brushes so that you blend those 3 different brushes. I want you to organize your layers similar to the way I organize my layers here. I would like you to use groups. You don't necessarily have to group every section together, but you need to demonstrate to me that you can use groups. It'd be nice if you could also demonstrate that you could collapse layers, but I want you to put everything on a separate layer and really celebrate the differences that you have. You can make this background as textured as you like, but I'd like you to stick within one medium per item. So I'm going to go ahead and stop it there because that's one example, and you can do any medium you like, and I encourage you to do more mediums than that. I'm going to stop this video and go ahead and record a couple more with different mediums, painting a sphere in different mediums, but you should go ahead and try and explore whatever medium you want to use in order to make the sphere that you like. Remember that you can choose any color. You do not need to choose red. I do not need to have 800 red spheres turned in, and I would like you to vary it up a little bit. It'll make it much more interesting. Remember constantly when you're working to save with Control S, and I will see you again next time.